My dad missed every birthday. Then I found out he was sitting in the back row the whole time. For 25 years, I believed my father had abandoned me, but the truth was hiding in plain sight. Hey everyone, before we get into the video, don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button if you want more stories just like this. Thanks for the support. My name is Jessica, and I'm 26 years old. If you were to look through my childhood photo albums, you would notice a pattern, a recurring void that shaped my entire life. In every birthday photo, every school performance, every graduation ceremony, there was always an empty space where a father should have been. Growing up, I didn't know much about my father. My mother rarely spoke of him, and when she did, her answers were vague and guarded. She would say he had his reasons when I asked why he wasn't there for my 5th birthday party, the one where I cried after blowing out my candles because I wished for a father who would come home. She would explain that it was complicated when I came home from elementary school Father's Day events with crafts I had made for a man I couldn't remember. The absence became a character in my life story. At my 8th birthday party, when all the other girls were lifted onto their father's shoulders for the traditional birthday toss, my uncle stepped in, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. At my middle school graduation, when fathers hugged their daughters with pride, I felt my mother's arm around my shoulders, her grip a little too tight. As I grew older, I stopped asking about him. The questions seemed to cause my mother pain, and I had learned to protect her from my own curiosity. But the questions never stopped echoing in my mind. On my 16th birthday, as I posed for photos with my friends, I caught my mother's reflection in the mirror. She was looking at me with such sadness that I realized she wasn't just seeing her daughter growing up, she was seeing the ghost of a family that might have been. The emotional toll of his absence manifested in different ways throughout my life. I struggled with relationships, always waiting for the other person to leave. I overachieved in school and sports, somehow believing that if I were successful enough, he would hear about me and return. I became fiercely independent, telling myself I didn't need a father figure, while secretly yearning for the paternal guidance I saw my friends receiving. When I met Michael in college, I was cautious. He was patient, understanding my reluctance to talk about family matters. It took him nearly a year to learn the full story of my father's absence. Instead of running, as I half expected, he held me as I cried through the story of my childhood milestones marked by absence. Michael proposed on a beach at sunset, 2 years after we graduated. As he slipped the ring on my finger, tears streamed down my face. They were tears of happiness, but also of grief for the father who wouldn't walk me down the aisle, for the father-daughter dance that would never happen, for the empty chair that would be at my wedding reception. My mother tried to be supportive as we planned the wedding, but I could see the strain in her eyes whenever we discussed the traditional father-daughter elements of the ceremony. Eventually, I asked my uncle to walk me down the aisle. He agreed, though I noticed he seemed uncomfortable with the role. The wedding day was beautiful, despite the lingering sense of incompleteness. As I stood at the altar, exchanging vows with Michael, I caught sight of my mother in the front row, her handkerchief already damp with tears. I smiled at her, trying to convey that I was happy, that I had accepted my reality, that I didn't need my father to be complete. But even as I said these things to myself, a small part of me still scanned the crowd, hoping against hope that somehow, somewhere in the sea of faces, I might find his. The reception was joyous, filled with dancing and laughter. When the DJ announced the father-daughter dance, I braced myself. My uncle stepped forward, his expression kind but uncertain. We danced awkwardly to Butterfly Kisses, the song I had dreamed of dancing to with my father since I was a little girl. I kept my smile fixed, refusing to let the guests see the tears threatening to fall. 2 weeks after the wedding, Michael and I sat on our sofa, scrolling through the wedding photos on our laptop. We laughed at candid shots of our friends dancing, admired the formal portraits, and reminisced about the day. As we reached the ceremony photos, Michael zoomed in on one taken during the vows. He pointed to the screen, commenting on the perfect lighting. I leaned in to look, but my eyes were drawn to something else in the photo. In the back row of guests, almost obscured by a pillar, sat a man who looked remarkably like the few photographs I had seen of my father. His face was partially hidden, but something about the set of his shoulders, the way his hair fell across his forehead, it was hauntingly familiar. A strange feeling washed over me as I whispered that it was weird and asked Michael to zoom in on that man in the back. He obliged, enlarging the section of the photo. As the image became clearer, my heart began to race. It couldn't be him. It must be a coincidence, a stranger who happened to resemble the man I hadn't seen in over 20 years. But as I stared at the screen, a certainty began to form in my mind. The man in the back row of my wedding photos was my father. The discovery left me breathless, my fingers trembling as I reached for the laptop. Michael watched me with concern, his brow furrowed in confusion. He asked what was wrong and who I thought the man was. I couldn't answer immediately. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The man in the photo had the same distinctive jawline as the few pictures of my father that my mother kept hidden in a box in her closet. His hair, though grayer than I remembered, had the same unruly curls. And his eyes, even in the grainy, zoomed-in image, I could see the same intensity I remembered from my earliest childhood memories. I finally managed to whisper that I thought it might be my father. Michael's eyes widened. He repeated the word father in disbelief, reminding me that my mother had said he'd left when I was little and wanted nothing to do with me. I confirmed that was what she had told me, but questioned why he would be there at my wedding and not say anything. We spent the next hour examining every wedding photo, searching for any other sign of the mysterious man. We found him in 3 more pictures, always in the background, always partially obscured, always watching in my direction. In one photo, taken during the reception, he was standing near the exit, his hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the dance floor where Michael and I were sharing our first dance as husband and wife. The more we found, the more confused I became. Why would he come all this way to attend my wedding, only to remain hidden in the shadows? Was he ashamed? Afraid? Or was there something else going on that I couldn't understand? A sudden thought struck me, and I announced that I needed to see the wedding video, standing up so quickly that I almost knocked over my wine glass. Michael nodded, already reaching for the DVD case. We had hired a professional videography team to document our wedding day, and they had delivered the final product just 2 days ago. We had been planning to watch it together that evening, but now the viewing had taken on a new urgency. As the video began to play on our large-screen television, I found myself holding my breath. The opening credits rolled over footage of the church exterior, the morning light casting a golden glow on the stained glass windows. Then the video transitioned to guests arriving for the ceremony. Michael suddenly pointed at the screen, telling me to pause it. I fumbled with the remote, my heart pounding in my chest. There, on the screen, was the man from the photographs, walking up the church steps. He was dressed simply in a dark suit, no tie, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He kept his head down, avoiding the camera's lens as he entered the church. My voice was barely audible as I instructed him to play it in slow motion. As the video progressed frame by frame, I saw him enter the church and take a seat in the very last row, partially hidden by a decorative pillar. He arrived early, before most of the other guests, and immediately opened a small book, perhaps a Bible or a prayer book, creating a barrier between himself and anyone who might approach. We fast-forwarded through the ceremony, watching as bridesmaids and groomsmen processed down the aisle. When my entrance music began, I felt a strange disconnect, watching myself on screen, knowing that my father was somewhere in that church watching me too. As I walked down the aisle on my uncle's arm, the camera angle changed, and for a moment we could see the back row of the church. There he was, his head lifted, his eyes fixed on me. The expression on his face was one of such intense emotion that tears sprang to my eyes. It was a mixture of pride, regret, love, and pain, a complex tapestry of feelings that I couldn't fully comprehend. The videographer had captured the moment perfectly, though unintentionally. For a few seconds before the camera refocused on me and my uncle, my father was visible in all his emotional vulnerability. I froze the frame, my fingers tracing the outline of his face on the screen. Michael noted softly that he looked so sad, putting his arm around my shoulders. I nodded, unable to speak. Seeing my father's face after all these years was overwhelming. He had aged, of course. There were lines around his eyes and gray in his hair that hadn't been there in the photographs I had secretly looked at as a teenager. But his essence, the core of who he was, remained unchanged. We continued watching the video, searching for any other glimpse of him. We found him during the reception, standing in the shadows near the buffet table, his plate untouched as he watched the festivities. We saw him during the cake cutting, his hands clasped in front of him as if in prayer. We even spotted him during the bouquet toss, standing near the exit as if ready to leave at a moment's notice. What struck me most was his isolation. He never spoke to anyone, never participated in any of the traditional wedding activities. He simply watched, his presence a silent testament to something I couldn't yet understand. The video ended with Michael and me driving away from the reception, "Just Married" written across the back of our car. As the credits rolled, I sat in stunned silence, my mind racing with questions. Why had he come? Why had he remained hidden? And most importantly, why had my mother lied to me all these years? I stood up abruptly, startling Michael. My voice was firm with resolve as I told him I needed to talk to my mother, and that I needed to do it right now. Michael nodded, reaching for his car keys to indicate he would drive. The drive to my mother's house was quiet, each of us lost in our own thoughts. I stared out the window, watching the familiar streets of my childhood pass by, seeing them through new eyes. How many times had my father walked these streets without my knowledge? How many times had we passed each other on the sidewalk, strangers connected by blood but separated by secrets? When we arrived at my mother's house, the lights were on and I could see her silhouette in the living room window. Taking a deep breath, I knocked on the door, my heart pounding with anticipation and fear. My mother opened the door, her face breaking into a smile. She exclaimed what a lovely surprise it was and mentioned she had just been thinking about us, asking if we had enjoyed watching the wedding video. I looked at her, my expression unreadable, and told her we had, but that it was actually the reason we were there, stating that we needed to talk. As I led her to the sofa, I noticed the slight hesitation in her step, the flicker of concern in her eyes. She knew. Somehow she knew what I was about to ask. My mother sat on the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Michael stood by the fireplace, giving us space but remaining close enough for support. I took a deep breath, trying to organize the chaos of thoughts and emotions swirling through my mind. I began by telling her we had seen something strange in the wedding photos and video, a man at the back of the church and at the reception who looked a lot like my dad. My mother's face paled, her eyes widening with what looked like fear. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, as if searching for the right words. She stammered my name, then shook her head, asking what exactly I had seen. I described the man in detail, his appearance, his location at the venue, his behavior throughout the event. As I spoke, my mother's expression shifted from fear to resignation, and finally to a kind of weary acceptance. She said quietly that she thought we should look at my old photo albums, standing up and walking toward the bookshelf in the corner of the living room. She mentioned there was something she should have shown me years ago, but wasn't sure it was the right thing to do. She returned with several large albums, their covers worn with age. I recognized them immediately. They were the same albums I had looked through countless times as a child, searching for any trace of my father. She acknowledged that I had looked through them before, but urged me to look again, this time with different eyes. Confused, I opened the first album, turning to the page with photos from my 3rd birthday party. There I was, a little girl with pigtails and a frilly dress, sitting in front of a cake decorated with cartoon characters. My mother stood beside me, her hand on my shoulder, smiling for the camera. My mother gently told me to look closer. I leaned in, examining the photo more carefully. In the background, partially hidden by the curtains, was a figure I had never noticed before, a man in a simple shirt and jeans, watching the party from the doorway. My heart began to race as I turned to the next page, a collection of photos from my first day of kindergarten. In the picture of me waving goodbye to my mother, there was a man leaning against a tree across the street, his face partially obscured by shadows. I asked in a trembling voice if that was him. My mother nodded, her eyes filled with tears, confirming that the man was my father. For the next hour, we went through album after album, and with each page, a new revelation emerged. There he was at my elementary school Christmas pageant, standing in the back of the auditorium. There he was at my soccer games, sitting alone on the opposite side of the field from the other parents. There he was at my middle school graduation, watching from a distance as I accepted my diploma. Each discovery was more shocking than the last. My father hadn't abandoned me at all. He had been present at virtually every important moment of my life, watching from the shadows, never approaching, never revealing himself. I finally looked up at my mother, tears streaming down my face, and asked why. Why would he do this? And why hadn't she told me? My mother sighed, her expression heavy with the weight of years of secrets. Her voice was barely a whisper as she said it was complicated, that there were things about my father's past she had never told me, things that made it dangerous for him to be part of my life in a normal way. I repeated the word dangerous in confusion, asking if he had been in some kind of trouble. My mother hesitated, glancing at Michael as if weighing how much to reveal in front of him. I gently told her it was okay, that Michael was my husband, and whatever she had to say, he should hear it too. Nodding slowly, my mother stood up and walked to a small cabinet in the corner of the room. From the back of a drawer, she retrieved a thick manila envelope, its edges yellowed with age. She handed the envelope to me, explaining that it had been my father's decision. He thought it was the only way to keep me safe. She said she had honored his wishes all these years, but now that I had seen him, now that I knew he had been there all along, she thought it was time I learned the truth. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. Inside were newspaper clippings, legal documents, and photographs, pieces of a puzzle I never knew existed. The newspaper clippings were from 26 years ago, just before I was born. They told the story of a high-profile criminal case involving a powerful organization that engaged in illegal activities ranging from fraud to extortion. One article in particular caught my eye. It featured a photograph of a young man with familiar features, my father, though much younger than I remembered him. The headline read, "Key Witness Disappears Before Testimony." I looked up at my mother, my eyes wide with disbelief. She spoke softly, explaining that my father wasn't just a witness, he was an insider who had agreed to testify against some very dangerous people. She described the night before he was supposed to testify, when he received a warning that they knew where he lived, that they knew about me, about her being pregnant with me. She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. She explained that he made a choice that night, a choice that broke his heart but saved our lives. He disappeared, entered witness protection, and made her promise not to tell anyone the truth. He had said that if anyone knew I was his daughter, I would be in danger. I stared at the documents in my hands, my mind struggling to process this information. My father hadn't abandoned me, he had protected me. He had sacrificed his relationship with his daughter to keep her safe. I asked in a barely audible voice why he would come to the wedding and why now. My mother smiled through her tears. She explained that the organization he testified against was dismantled years ago. The threat was gone. He had been free to contact me for a long time, but he didn't know how. He was afraid I would hate him for staying away. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening street. She said softly that he had called her after my wedding. He was worried I might have seen him. He wanted to know if I was happy, if I had a good life. I stood up and walked to her side, putting my arm around her shoulders. My voice was filled with determination as I told her I needed to see him, asking where he was. My mother turned to face me, her expression a mixture of relief and apprehension. She told me he was staying at the old motel on the edge of town, in room 217. He had said he would leave the next day if he didn't hear from her. I looked at Michael, who nodded in understanding. I announced that we were going to see him, tonight, already reaching for my car keys. As we prepared to leave, my mother handed me a small photograph that had been tucked inside the envelope. It was a picture of my father holding me as a baby, his face filled with a love so profound it took my breath away. My mother's voice was soft as she told me he had never stopped loving me, not for a single day. I clutched the photograph to my chest, my heart pounding with anticipation and fear. After 26 years of absence, I was finally going to meet the father who had been there all along. The drive to the motel was silent, each of us lost in our own thoughts. I clutched the photograph my mother had given me, my fingers tracing the outline of my father's face as he held infant me in his arms. The love in his eyes was undeniable, a stark contrast to the abandonment I had felt throughout my life. The motel was exactly as my mother had described, an old single-story building with flickering neon signage that had seen better decades. Room 217 was at the far end of the building, its curtains drawn tight against the night. Michael parked the car, killing the engine but leaving the headlights on, illuminating the worn pavement in front of us. Neither of us moved, both of us aware that we were on the threshold of something life-changing. Michael asked softly if I was ready for this, reaching for my hand. I nodded, though my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I said I thought so, that I had to be, after all these years. We got out of the car, the night air cool against my skin. As we walked toward room 217, I noticed how my footsteps seemed to echo in the silence, each step bringing me closer to answers I had sought my entire life. I knocked on the door, my knuckles rapping against the weathered wood. For a moment, there was no response, and I wondered if he had already left. Then I heard the sound of movement inside, the click of a lock being turned. The door opened slowly, revealing a man who was both familiar and strange. He was older than in the photographs, his hair grayer at the temples, lines etched around his eyes and mouth. But his eyes, those were the same eyes I had seen in my wedding video, filled with a mixture of hope and fear. He stared at me, his mouth slightly open, as if he couldn't quite believe I was standing there. I stared back, my mind racing with 1,000 questions, all of them caught in my throat. He finally said my name, his voice deeper than I expected, but somehow exactly as I remembered it from my earliest childhood memories. I replied with the word Dad, the single syllable feeling both foreign and natural at the same time. He stepped aside, inviting us into the room. It was sparsely furnished, a bed with a simple quilt, a small desk with a laptop, and a chair where a jacket was draped. On the nightstand stood a framed photograph, the same one my mother had given me, of him holding me as a baby. He spoke first, admitting that he wasn't sure I would come. He mentioned that my mother said she would tell me, but he understood how this must look to me. I turned to face him, my emotions a tangled mess of anger, confusion, and a desperate need for understanding. My voice was shaking as I asked him why. Why would he watch me grow up from a distance but never approach me? Why attend my wedding but stay hidden in the back? He sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. His eyes met mine, and I saw a lifetime of pain reflected in their depths. He explained softly that he had made a promise to my mother the night he left. He had promised that as long as there was any danger, he would stay away. He had promised that he would protect me, even if it meant I would never know he was there. He walked to the window, pulling back the curtain slightly to peer outside. He explained that the organization he was supposed to testify against weren't just business people. They were dangerous people who didn't hesitate to eliminate threats. He said that I, as his daughter, would have been the ultimate threat to them. He turned back to face me, his expression filled with regret. He described entering witness protection that night, how they gave him a new identity, a new life in a different state. But he couldn't stay away completely. He had to know I was safe, that I was happy. He walked to the small desk and opened a drawer, retrieving a stack of photo albums similar to the ones my mother had shown me. He placed them on the bed, explaining that he had been keeping a record. Every birthday, every school event, every milestone, he was there, watching from a distance. He said my mother would send him details about when and where, and he would find a way to be there without being noticed. I opened the first album, my hands trembling. Inside were photographs taken from a distance, me at my 5th birthday party, blowing out candles on a cake decorated with princesses. In the background, barely visible, was a figure watching from the edge of the yard. He explained that he couldn't risk anyone recognizing him, that he couldn't risk someone making the connection between us. So he kept his distance, always in the shadows, never too close. As I flipped through the pages, I saw my life unfold through his eyes. My first day of school, my soccer games, my dance recitals, my high school graduation. In each photograph, he was there, a silent guardian watching from the periphery. Tears streamed down my face as I realized the depth of his sacrifice. He hadn't abandoned me at all. He had protected me in the only way he knew how. He continued, his voice thick with emotion, explaining that the organization was finally dismantled about 10 years ago. The last of the key members were arrested, and the threat was eliminated. But by then, so much time had passed. He didn't know how to approach me, how to explain 20 years of absence. He was afraid I would hate him. He walked to the nightstand and picked up the framed photograph of him holding me as a baby. He said softly that he had carried this with him everywhere he had gone. It had reminded him of what he was fighting for, what he was protecting, but it was also a reminder of what he had lost, of what he had given up to keep me safe. I looked at Michael, who had been standing quietly by the door, giving us space. He nodded encouragingly, his eyes filled with understanding. I turned back to my father, my heart aching with the weight of years of misunderstanding. My voice was barely a whisper as I told him I didn't hate him, that I was confused and hurt, but I didn't hate him. I just didn't understand why he didn't reach out once the danger was gone. He sighed, his shoulders slumping with the weight of years of regret. He explained quietly that by the time the threat was gone, I had grown up without him. I had a life, friends, a mother who loved me enough to lie to protect me. He didn't want to disrupt that, to bring confusion and pain into my life. He thought it was better to let me continue believing he had abandoned me than to introduce complications I didn't need. He walked to the small refrigerator in the corner of the room, retrieving a bottle of water. He explained that when I got engaged, he knew he had to be there to see me begin this new chapter of my life. He had asked my mother if it would be okay, if she thought I could handle seeing him there, even from a distance. I took a sip of water, my mind racing with questions. I asked why the wedding specifically, and why not before? He smiled sadly, his eyes distant with memory. He explained that it was the final milestone, the last major event where he could see me happy and complete without having to interfere. After that, he planned to disappear completely, to leave me to my life with Michael. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of pride and sorrow. He said I had grown into a remarkable woman, strong, compassionate, intelligent. He said my mother had done an amazing job raising me, and that he couldn't be prouder, even though he had to watch from the shadows. I stood up and walked to him, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. As I reached out to touch his arm, I felt him flinch slightly, as if unaccustomed to physical contact. I said softly that I had so many questions about his life, about why he got involved with those people, about what happened after he entered witness protection. He nodded, his expression a mixture of relief and apprehension. He replied that he had answers, but that they weren't easy answers, and that some of them might be difficult to hear. I looked at Michael, who nodded encouragingly. I told my father we had time, 26 years of time to catch up on. As we sat down on the edge of the bed, surrounded by albums that documented a lifetime of silent observation, I realized that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't yet imagine. The father I had believed had abandoned me had been my silent guardian all along, and now, finally, we had a chance to bridge the gap that had separated us for so long. 6 months have passed since that night in the motel room, and life has transformed in ways I never could have imagined. The locket my father gave me rests against my chest every day, a constant reminder of the connection that was never truly broken, only hidden. My father, whose name is Robert, moved to an apartment just a few blocks from our home. The first few weeks were awkward, filled with tentative conversations and careful navigation around the years of absence. We started with simple things: weekly dinners, phone calls, occasional outings to places I had visited as a child. I learned about his life during those missing years, the different identities he had assumed, the various jobs he had held, the constant vigilance he had maintained even after the threat had passed. He told me about the loneliness of his existence, the ache of watching his daughter grow up from a distance, the fear that she would hate him if she ever learned the truth. During one of our first dinners together in his small apartment, surrounded by boxes he had only partially unpacked, he explained that he never stopped loving me. He said that every decision he made, every sacrifice he endured, was because he wanted me to have a life free from the shadows that had followed him. I nodded, my fingers tracing the patterns on the locket at my throat. I replied softly that I understood that now, but that it was still hard sometimes. Hard to reconcile the father I thought had abandoned me with the father who had been protecting me. He reached across the table, his hand hovering near mine before gently taking it in his. His touch was tentative, as if he was still afraid I might pull away. He said he knew, and that all he could ask was that I let him create new memories with me, memories that could eventually outweigh the ones of absence. As the months passed, we began to build those new memories. Robert attended my graduate school ceremony, this time sitting in the front row, his face beaming with pride as I received my diploma. He joined us for Thanksgiving dinner, carving the turkey with a skill that surprised us all. He even helped Michael and me decorate our first Christmas tree as a married couple, sharing stories of holidays from my childhood that he had witnessed from a distance. My mother, who had initially been anxious about our reunion, gradually relaxed as she saw the bond forming between us. The three of us had dinner together every Sunday, creating a new family tradition that felt both strange and natural. One evening, as we sat around her dining table, the candles casting a warm glow on our faces, she said she never thought she would see the day when the three of us were together after all these years. Robert smiled, his eyes meeting mine across the table. He replied softly that it was more than he had ever hoped for. But the process of healing wasn't always smooth. There were moments of tension, difficult conversations about the past, tears shed for years of lost connection. I struggled with conflicting emotions: gratitude for his protection, anger for his absence, love for the father I was just getting to know. One particularly difficult evening, as we sat in the living room of our home, I found myself confronting him about the pain I had felt throughout my childhood. My voice was shaking with emotion as I asked him if he had any idea what it was like. Every Father's Day at school, every daddy-daughter dance, every time I saw other girls with their fathers, knowing that mine had chosen to leave. Robert's face filled with pain, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. He said he could imagine, and that he was sorry, so sorry for the pain his absence had caused me. He pleaded with me to know that it wasn't a choice to leave me, it was a choice to protect me, even if it meant breaking both our hearts in the process. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the darkness beyond. He continued, his voice thick with emotion, asking if I knew how many times he had wanted to approach me. He described how many times he had to stop himself from running to me when I fell on the playground, or when I looked so sad after a school dance. He said it was the hardest thing he had ever done, harder than testifying against that organization, harder than living in hiding, harder than anything I could imagine. I stood up and walked to his side, my heart aching with the weight of his words. I said softly that I was trying to understand. He turned to face me, his eyes filled with tears, and replied that that was all he could ask. As the holiday season approached, Michael and I began making plans for our first Christmas as a married couple. Initially, I struggled with how to incorporate Robert into our traditions, which had always centered around my mother and me. Michael suggested one evening that we should start a new tradition, something that included all of us. Something that acknowledged the past but looked toward the future. His suggestion sparked an idea, and the following weekend, the three of us, my mother, Robert, and I, went through old photographs, selecting images from different periods of my life. We created a timeline of my childhood, with Robert pointing out moments where he had been present but hidden, and my mother filling in details I had never known. On Christmas morning, Michael and I invited both our parents to our home. As we exchanged gifts, I presented Robert with a special present, a photo album I had created, titled "The Father Who Was Always There." The album contained photographs from my childhood, but with a difference. Each page included both the original photo and a new version where Robert had been digitally added, his presence no longer hidden in the background, but visible and acknowledged. As he flipped through the pages, tears streamed down his face. He said, his voice thick with emotion, that it was the most thoughtful gift anyone had ever given him. He thanked me for seeing him, for acknowledging that he was there, even when I couldn't see him. My mother watched us with tears in her eyes, her expression a mixture of relief and happiness. She said softly that we both deserved this, deserved the chance to know each other, to create the memories that had been stolen from us. As the day progressed, I found myself watching Robert, seeing the way his eyes lit up when he laughed, the gentle way he interacted with Michael's family, the pride in his expression as he looked at me. For the first time, I wasn't seeing the father who had abandoned me or the protector who had watched from the shadows. I was seeing my dad, present and real, a bridge between my past and my future. That evening, as we sat around the Christmas tree, Robert excused himself for a moment, returning with a small wrapped box. He said he had one more gift for me, handing it to me. Inside was a key to his apartment, attached to a simple silver keychain engraved with the words, "Home." He explained softly that he knew I had my own home with Michael, but he wanted me to know that I always had a place with him, too, a place where I was welcome, where I belonged. Tears filled my eyes as I hugged him, feeling the years of distance between us dissolve in that moment of connection. I whispered, "Thank you, Dad," the word feeling natural and right. As we sat together, surrounded by the warmth of family and the soft glow of Christmas lights, I realized that the empty spaces in my life had finally been filled. The father I had mourned as lost was here, present and real, and we had a lifetime of memories yet to create. The story of my relationship with my father isn't a simple one. It's complex, layered with pain and sacrifice, misunderstanding and revelation. But as I look toward the future, I know that the years ahead will be shaped not by the absence of the past, but by the presence of today. A presence that was always there, even when I couldn't see it, waiting in the back row until the time was right to step forward.